Because what it did to my daughter, no human being could do. That's a demon that does something like that.
To die the way she did, as young as she was, just 24, Rebecca Costa is out at a bar with her boyfriend. Then another man hits on the gregarious beauty.
They met that night at the bar, but that was really all that we knew. We didn't know anything.
And Rebecca mysteriously vanishes that very same night.
We searched, we watched, day and night.
Until she turns up murdered in the most gruesome of ways.
An ordinary night. A young woman getting dropped off at her own front door, safe, at 3:30 in the morning. Her mother's phone rings. It's her. She says she's home. She says she's fine. She says goodnight. By the time the sun comes up, that voice will never be heard again. Somewhere between that phone call and sunrise, a 24-year-old woman named Rebecca disappeared from the inside of her own home, without a struggle her family could see, without a witness, without a scream anyone heard. 15 hours later and 80 miles away, a stranger driving down a dark country road in another state will think he's looking at a brush fire on the shoulder of the road. He is not looking at a brush fire. Type your city below. Tell me your time. And then let's go back to the beginning, because what happened to Rebecca Costa is one of the strangest, cruelest, and most quietly terrifying cases I have ever covered, and there is a twist at the end of this story that even people who think they know true crime are not going to see coming. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Cold Case Archive. Every week I dig through court records, police statements, and real investigative files to bring you the true stories behind America's most disturbing unsolved and reopened cases. No dramatization, no fiction, just what actually happened. If that's the kind of thing you're into, hit subscribe and tap that notification bell right now, because you do not want to miss what's coming in this story. Alright. Let's get into it. The town of Stonington, Connecticut, does not look like the kind of place where something terrible happens. It's the kind of New England town you'd put on a postcard. Rolling hills. Stone walls older than the country itself. Long, winding roads that twist through dense woods and past quiet farmhouses, and at night, when the fog settles in over the fields, those roads turn pitch black. It was on one of those roads, on a cold night in early December, 2009, that a man driving home noticed something burning on the shoulder up ahead. His first thought was simple. A brush fire. Maybe some debris someone had set alight. He pulled over, grabbed his fire extinguisher from the trunk, and started walking toward the flames. At almost the same moment, purely by chance, the local fire chief happened to be driving that same stretch of road and saw the glow too. He pulled over as well, extinguisher in hand, and began putting out the flames. And then he realized what he was looking at. It wasn't debris. It wasn't brush. It was a human body. In an instant, this went from a roadside fire to an active crime scene, and the fire chief did something that would matter more than he could have known in that moment. Instead of blasting the flames directly, he angled the spray of the extinguisher upward, so the chemicals would fall gently rather than blast the remains, preserving whatever evidence might still be there to preserve. Connecticut state troopers arrived and shut the road down. What they found, once the fire was out, was almost impossible to process. A young woman's body, burned nearly beyond recognition, wrapped tightly in layers of plastic, blankets, sheets, and duct tape, bound the way you'd wrap something you needed to move, and needed to hide. It was immediately clear to investigators that this was not where she had died. This was a dump site. Somebody had killed this woman somewhere else entirely, and then driven her out here, into the dark, rural quiet of Connecticut, to get rid of her. The only problem was, nobody had any idea who she was. The body was taken to the Connecticut office of the chief medical examiner, where a forensic pathologist with decades of experience began the grim task of trying to answer two questions: who was this woman, and what happened to her? As the layers of plastic and fabric were peeled back, carefully, one at a time, to avoid destroying any trace evidence that might still cling to the body, the pathologist could tell they were looking at a young woman, likely in her 20s. Her skin tone suggested she may have been light-skinned black or possibly Latina, but the fire had done so much damage that even basic identification was going to be a challenge. And then the pathologist noticed something that made this case even darker. Her fingers were gone. Her toes were gone. Her nose and ears were missing. And a section of skin had been deliberately removed from one of her ankles. This was not simply fire damage. Someone had cut these features away, and the reason was obvious to every investigator in that room. Whoever did this was trying to erase her identity. No fingerprints to run. No toe rings or ankle tattoos to recognize. Somebody wanted this woman to remain a Jane Doe forever. But then the medical examiner noticed something else. The front of her body had burned far more severely than her back. That told a story of its own. When she was set on fire, she'd been lying face up, and the portion of her lower back pressed into the ground had been shielded from the worst of the flames. And on that lower back, there was a patch where the skin was simply gone. Not burned away. Cut away. Deliberately removed. The pathologist's working theory, there had been a tattoo there. And someone had gone to the trouble of cutting it off her body, because they knew, correctly, that a distinctive tattoo could be the one thing that gave her away. Investigators searched Connecticut's missing persons databases for any young woman matching her general description with a large tattoo on her lower back. Nothing came up. So they widened the search, state by state, until, roughly 80 miles away, on Long Island, New York, they found a name that stopped them cold. Rebecca. Rebecca Costa was 24 years old. She lived at home with her parents in Medford, on Long Island, and worked as a home health aide, caring for developmentally disabled adults. By every account from the people who loved her, she was warm, outgoing, and full of life, the kind of daughter who made her mother feel, in her own words, like she'd done something right. Her mother, Barbara, worked overnight shifts as a nurse. On the night Rebecca disappeared, Barbara had left for work as usual, watching her daughter clown around with her younger brother in the kitchen before heading out with her friends for the night. Rebecca told her mother the plan. She'd go out with her best friend and her boyfriend, hang out for a while at their usual spot, then come home, get some sleep, and go to work in the morning like nothing had happened. Her boyfriend at the time, we'll call him Dan, as the case files do, was a relatively new relationship. Nothing especially serious, nothing especially dramatic. Just a young couple a few months in. That night, Rebecca went out with Dan, her best friend, and a small group of others, eventually landing at a bar on Long Island that surveillance cameras would later prove played a critical role in this story. At around 3:30 in the morning, Rebecca called her mother, as she always did, to let her know she was home safe. She sounded fine. Normal. Like any other night. It was the last time anyone would ever hear her voice. The next day, Rebecca didn't show up for her shift. Her employer called her father, worried, and her father filed a missing persons report. Barbara, coming home from her overnight shift, tried calling Rebecca's cell phone. No answer. She left a message. She called again. Still nothing. For a young woman who always texted her mother back, this silence was immediately, viscerally wrong. Barbara called Rebecca's best friend. But her friend had left earlier that night, leaving Rebecca with Dan and the rest of the group. She had no idea where Rebecca was either. Naturally, in any case like this, the boyfriend becomes the first person investigators want to talk to, and Dan was no exception. He told police that he and the others had dropped Rebecca off at her front door at around 3:30 in the morning, watched her go inside safely, and left. That, according to him, was the last time he ever saw her. He swore, over and over, that he loved her and would never hurt her. Investigators, still not convinced, asked if he'd be willing to take a polygraph test. He agreed. The results came back as inconclusive at best, deceptive at worst, a detail that, on its own, might sound damning. But polygraphs are notoriously unreliable, and investigators knew it. What mattered more was that Dan's story, and the stories of everyone else who'd been with Rebecca that night, all lined up. A search of his home turned up nothing. No red flags. Nothing connecting him to a crime. The boyfriend, for now, was in the clear. With no fingerprints available on the burned body, and dental records the only viable path to a positive identification, investigators contacted Rebecca's family and were given access to her dental history. Long Island police personally hand-delivered the records to Connecticut. The Connecticut medical examiner compared them against the dental structure of the Jane Doe found burning on the side of the road. It was a match. The unidentified woman found in Stonington, Connecticut, was Rebecca Costa of Medford, Long Island, 80 miles from home, burned beyond recognition, mutilated to hide who she was. Detectives now had the impossible job of telling a mother that her daughter was dead. When Barbara opened her front door and saw the detective standing there, she said only 3 words, "It's bad news." They asked her to sit down. They told her they'd found Becky. That it was a homicide. Barbara ran out of her own house, down the driveway, screaming into the night that someone had killed her baby. Now investigators had a name, a victim, and a mother demanding answers. What they didn't have yet was a suspect. So they went back to the timeline. And in reviewing Rebecca's phone records, her family noticed something chilling. After Dan dropped her off at 3:30 in the morning, Rebecca's phone had received 2 calls from the same unfamiliar number, one at around 10 minutes past 4, and another roughly 27 minutes past 4. Whoever was on the other end of that phone, investigators believed, was very likely the last person to ever speak to Rebecca Costa alive. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment down below with the words, "I'm still here." I want to see who is actually following this story all the way through, because I promise you, what's coming in the next few minutes changes everything you think you know about this case. Okay. Let's keep going. Cell phone technology gave investigators one enormous advantage. Every call bounces between cell towers, and by tracking which towers that mystery number pinged off of during those 2 calls, police could roughly trace the caller's movement. What they found was unsettling. The signal showed the caller moving steadily in the direction of Rebecca's home. The first call, the longer one, lasted around 15 minutes. The second call, the one at 27 minutes past 4, lasted only about 20 seconds. To investigators, that pattern told a story. Someone had called Rebecca once to talk, and called her again, briefly, once they had arrived. Investigators believed this person was standing outside, or even inside, Rebecca Costa's home in the pre-dawn hours of that morning. But when they tried to trace the number itself, they hit a wall. It didn't match any account in any system they could access. No name. No billing address. Nothing. It had all the markers of a prepaid, untraceable phone, the kind bought with cash specifically so it can never be traced back to its owner. For a while, the trail went cold. While detectives worked the phone angle, the medical examiner was working the body, trying to determine not just who she was, but what, exactly, had killed her. One of the first questions in any burn case is whether the victim was alive when the fire started. Investigators look for soot inside the lungs. If a person is breathing during a fire, the smoke gets pulled deep into the airway. In Rebecca's case, there was no soot in her lungs at all. She had not been breathing when the fire began. Whatever killed her had already happened. The fire had destroyed most of the surface evidence on her skin, so the examiner turned to her internal organs, and found a stab wound to her liver, along with a significant amount of blood that had pooled internally, evidence that her heart had still been beating, at least for a short time, after that injury occurred. But there was more. Several sharp force injuries to her neck. And on X-ray, the examiner found something specific and telling, air trapped inside the chambers of her heart. When certain veins in the neck are cut while a person is still alive, air can be drawn directly into the bloodstream and travel to the heart, causing it to stop beating almost instantly. It's called an air embolism, and it's a mechanism of death that can only occur while someone is still alive. Between the stab wound to her liver and the injuries to her neck, the medical examiner ruled her death a homicide, caused by multiple sharp force injuries. Rebecca Costa had been killed somewhere else, and then transported 80 miles, wrapped, and set on fire in an attempt to erase every trace of who she was. With a confirmed homicide and a rough time of death, investigators went back to the bar where Rebecca had spent her final hours and pulled every second of surveillance footage from that night. And there, on the recording, they saw something that Rebecca's own friends hadn't even noticed at the time. At one point in the evening, while her boyfriend and friends were talking to other people, Rebecca sat alone for a few minutes. And a man approached her. He wasn't part of her usual crowd. Older than the 20-something regulars around him, dressed more conservatively, almost deliberately unassuming, in a sweater vest, blending into the background of a crowded bar. He walked directly up to Rebecca and struck up a conversation. On the footage, investigators could see them both pull out their phones. It looked, unmistakably, like they were exchanging numbers. For the first time, investigators had a face, a stranger who had approached Rebecca Costa on the very last night of her life, exchanged contact information with her, and then, based on the timeline, appeared to have called her twice in the hours before her death, from a phone that led absolutely nowhere. Working backward from the bar's footage, witness accounts from staff and patrons, and a painstaking cross-reference of who had been in that bar that night, investigators were eventually able to attach a name to the man in the sweater vest. His name was Evans Ganthier. 30 years old, from Central Islip, New York, not far at all from where Rebecca lived. When police went looking for him, his story didn't match the timeline investigators had already built. And when detectives searched his vehicle and his home, they found what would ultimately become the most damning evidence in the entire case, a significant amount of blood inside his car, along with clear signs that someone had recently and thoroughly attempted to clean the inside of that home. Then came the detail that sealed it. On the very tape used to bind Rebecca's body before it was dumped and set on fire, the same tape investigators had so carefully preserved on that dark Connecticut roadside, forensic examiners lifted a fingerprint. It belonged to Evans Ganthier. And in a detail that still, to this day, makes this case almost impossible to comprehend, in the days after Rebecca went missing, while her family was frantically searching for her and police were combing the state for any sign of her, someone sent a series of text messages from Rebecca's own phone to her family. The messages claimed, falsely, that she was fine, that she was simply being held somewhere by her boyfriend and would turn up soon. Rebecca was already dead when those messages were sent. Investigators came to believe the messages were sent by her killer, using her own phone, as a deliberate, cruel act of misdirection to buy himself time, sending her desperate family chasing a lie while the truth sat charred on the side of a country road. On the 8th of February, 2010, roughly 2 months after her body was discovered, Evans Ganthier was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty. His attorney maintained his innocence. And the case moved toward trial. At trial, Ganthier's defense did not claim he was somewhere else that night. He couldn't. The phone records, the surveillance footage, the fingerprint on the tape, and the blood in his car put him unmistakably at the center of Rebecca's final hours. Instead, his defense argued something almost stranger than an outright denial, that Rebecca's death had been a tragic accident. That she had fallen and struck her head on some exercise equipment inside his garage, and that, panicking, terrified he'd be blamed for a death he didn't cause, he made the decision to mutilate and burn her body to hide what had happened. The prosecution argued something very different, that Rebecca Costa had been fatally stabbed, and that everything that followed, the mutilation, the transportation of her body across state lines, the fire, and even the cruel, misleading text messages sent from her own phone, were the calculated actions of a man trying to erase a murder. On the 29th of August, 2013, a jury agreed with the prosecution. Evans Ganthier was found guilty of second-degree murder. At sentencing, the presiding judge looked directly at Ganthier and told him, in essence, that his account of an accidental death made no sense, that neither the judge nor the jury believed him for a moment. He was handed the maximum possible sentence, 25 years to life in prison. For Rebecca's family, it was some measure of justice, even if it could never undo what had happened. Her mother, who referred to Ganthier only as it, in the years that followed, vowed to be present at every single parole hearing for the rest of her life, to make sure he was never released. Her uncle put it simply, that no sentence, however long, could ever make what happened to Rebecca right, but that at least he was behind bars, unable to do this to anyone else. For over a decade, that was where this story ended. A young woman, brutally killed. A killer, identified through forensic science, phone records, and old-fashioned detective work, convicted and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. But this story does not end there. In August of 2025, nearly 16 years after Rebecca Costa's body was found burning on that Connecticut roadside, a federal judge issued a ruling that reopened this entire case. Ganthier's legal team had spent years appealing his conviction, and one specific argument finally succeeded. At his original trial, the medical examiner who had actually performed Rebecca's autopsy never testified in court. Instead, a different medical examiner, one who had only handled the dental identification, not the autopsy itself, was the one who described the autopsy findings to the jury, relaying another doctor's conclusions secondhand. Under the United States Constitution, a defendant has the right to confront and cross-examine the actual witnesses against him. The federal court ruled that presenting one doctor's findings through a different doctor's testimony, without ever giving the defense the chance to directly question the person who performed the autopsy, violated that right. And because the cause of Rebecca's death was the single most contested issue at trial, the court ruled the error was serious enough that it could have changed the outcome. The result, Evans Ganthier's conviction was vacated. His case was sent back for a completely new trial. That means, right now, as you're watching this video, this case is not the closed chapter it appeared to be for over 10 years. The forensic evidence, the phone records, the fingerprint on the tape, all of it will very likely be presented again, in front of a brand new jury, in a trial that has yet to happen. A woman is still gone. A family is still waiting. And a case that once felt finished has been pulled wide open again. What makes this case so unsettling isn't just the cruelty of it, the mutilation, the fire, the cold, calculated lie sent from a dead woman's own phone to torture her grieving family for a few more days. It's how ordinary the beginning of that night was. A night out with friends. A stranger at a bar. A phone number exchanged, the way millions of people exchange phone numbers every single weekend without a second thought. Rebecca Costa did what so many of us do without thinking twice. She trusted that a stranger being friendly at a bar was exactly that, and nothing more. As her own mother said afterward, there are people out there who look completely ordinary, completely harmless, and are anything but. This case reminds us that justice is rarely as simple as a verdict and a sentencing date. Sometimes it takes years to even get a name. Sometimes, even after a conviction, the fight for the truth isn't actually over. If this story moved you, if it kept you watching all the way to the very end, do 3 things for me right now. Hit that like button, it genuinely helps this channel and this story reach more people who need to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me what part of this case shocked you the most. Was it the fingerprint on the tape, the fake text messages, or the twist at the very end? And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Cold Case Archive and turn on notifications, because every single week, I bring you another real case just like this one, cases that are stranger, sadder, and more unbelievable than anything fiction could invent. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. And I'll see you in the next one.